Hello friends, this is Growl. In this video, I'm going to teach you everything you need to know to play Resto Shaman in 9.1 Mythic Plus. This video is going to mostly just cover my choices and why I do what I do, but it'll also cover all the stuff I've learned from playing Shaman in high keys, as well as answer a lot of commonly asked questions. In this way, I hope it's going to be helpful to people that are just setting up their Shaman for the first time right now, but also people who are coming back to Shaman after maybe the beginning of the patch or previous expansions, and just want to figure out what's going on. Shaman is a really flexible healer. It does really good upfront healing and also has good utility and solid damage. I think Shaman's going to be one of the contenders for the top healer in 9.1. I think we're definitely going to see them in at least some of the highest keys. Shaman's also a pug favorite because it's pretty straightforward to play, pretty easy, pretty safe. It has an interrupt, it has bloodlust, and you can play basically any covenant with it. Before I go into specifics, I do want to say that I make a ton of other stuff on my channel, like video reviews. I also stream high keys on my Twitch channel, so if you would like more healer content, be sure to subscribe to my channel and go follow my Twitch. I'll have links for all that stuff, as well as like my UI and my party frames in the description of the video. So what's changing with Shaman in 9.1? Well, sort of nothing, but it's actually bigger than you might think. So the first thing is we're getting some good legendaries. I'll go over the Covenant legendaries later, but almost all of the Covenant legendaries for every single Covenant I think will be usable in Mythic Plus, or could be even best, especially the Kyrian one. You'll see that I just recently switched my Shaman to Kyrian. Another important change that isn't Shaman's, but do affect the metagame, is there's a pretty hefty Paladin damage nerf that happened. Although it doesn't directly affect us, Shaman was overtaken by Paladin in Season 1 mainly because Paladin just did so much damage, and now that Paladin's damage is more in line with the other healers, you can sort of use your strong healing and your utility to kind of hopefully close the gap and maybe even surpass Paladin this season. Let's talk about setup stuff. Race doesn't matter at all. For Horde, I like playing Goblin just because of the Goblin jump, and for Alliance, I would probably play Dwarf, but race basically doesn't matter. Play a Valkyria, I don't care. For stats are really hard. Realistically, you kind of want to balance for everything. Always prioritize item level. Always prioritize item level. If you have to pick stats, for example, you're making your legendary or your gems or something, for Mythic Plus, I would recommend Haste Verse. That's because these are the highest damage stats, and they're still pretty good for healing too, and survival. However, keep in mind that you may not want to have super high haste because of the new seasonal affix that gives you a lot of haste with one of the powers, and I would recommend picking that power very often with Shaman, so keep that in mind. Again, for raid, I would say go crit verse probably, because haste isn't that strong. So if you're making a Lego that you plan on using for both raid and Mythic Plus, I would put crit verse on it, because again, all the stats are good, and in raid you prefer not to have as much haste. Mastery can be a good stat. It's actually really good for like triage or emergency healing if someone's in danger and they have low health. The issue is that it doesn't help with your damage, and not that damage is everything, but because all the stats are good, right? You don't really care that much about mastery. So as a beginner Shaman, there's nothing wrong with having mastery. Shaman mastery is actually great, especially your first few hundred points, but you'll probably see Shamans at the highest level sort of wean away from it. As for trinkets, there's not much new. I think the go-to for sure is going to be Changeling from Mists of Tyrannus Scythe. That's just a good stat stick trinket. Other options, you can use the Unused Ruby from Theater. This is going to be a pretty solid trinket. There's not really too many other good dungeon trinkets. From the raid, you can use the, I think it's the Titanic Ocular Gland. This is, again, just a really nice stat stick. In general, you're just looking for trinkets that give you a lot of stats. I haven't really found any great unused trinkets for Shaman other than maybe Ruby. Shaman in general doesn't really have that much that you would want to pair with an unused anyway. Like Ascendance is such a powerful cooldown that there's not really a point in pressing a trinket with it. It should basically full heal your party anyway. Now for enchants. For gear, I want to have just normal stuff. Stamina and Leech or Avoidance on your cape. 30 stats on chest. 15 intellect on bracers. Celestial Guidance on a weapon. And as we talked about stats earlier, for high keys, I usually gem verse. I feel like I have enough haste, but as you're gearing up, if your item level is low, you may want to gem and enchant haste if you feel like your cast times are really, really slow and people are dying like mid-cast or whatever. But once you get really geared up, and especially when you're doing high keys, I don't think you'll really need that much haste. Even 30% I think is too much probably. And for consumables, we have our Spectral Flask here. You want to grab these. This will give you int for the whole dungeon. Armor kits, this gives you stamina. Any sort of food buff is fine. I've been using Crown Roast. Ideally, you use a Feast for the intellect. You have your Shadow Core Oil. This is a very small damage buff. And if you really want to try hard, you have your Augment Runes as well. These can be pretty expensive, and they go away on death, so not super important. A few small consumables that I get asked about a lot. For Shaman, I like to use the Savory Deviant Delight if I'm playing Goblin. That's because it makes my character taller, and it also looks a little bit cooler. I don't really like Goblin look. When you're taller, you have less line of sight issues, as silly as that sounds. Like, if you're a Goblin, you might get line of sighted by this rock, but as a pirate, you can see over it. Another consumable I like to use, now that we're Kyrian, we're in the Bastion area, is the Inky Black Potion from the Dark Moon Fair. This gives you this, like, dark night sky look. This area I just find is too bright, and I kind of like this look better. Although, again, they cost a little bit of gold. Excuse me. Just a little sick, but I want to get these guides out early as possible. So let's talk about Covenant Legendaries, or Legendaries, I guess. So the best Covenant Legendary, in my opinion, is the Kyrian one. I'm struggling here navigating the menus. The best Covenant Legendary I found is the Raging Vesper Vortex. This does an absurd amount of damage, and I think we'll see Shamans in the highest keys playing Kyrian. That being said, I think healing-wise, and, you know, maybe for other reasons, all the other Covenants are still really good too, so don't feel like you have to play Kyrian if you're playing Shaman. You know, if you want to copy me or copy Thaner or whatever the other healers are doing, you can. But if you're, let's say you want to play another spec, or you want to play PvP or raid or whatever, all of these other Covenants are viable all the way up until the highest keys. Don't let anyone tell you they're not. As for the Covenant Legos, I think all of them are probably worth using to start, because they're flexible. In general, they help your healing and your damage, which are very, very important in Mythic Plus. You know, being able to have a legendary that's very versatile and it's not just used for one purpose. The main problem with all the Shaman Legos previously is that they're very one-dimensional. You know, Spirit Walker's Tidal Totem only helps your healing during Mana Tide. Primal Tide only gives you Riptide. Deep Tremor only gives you an Earthquake and is only used for damage. But all these Covenant Legos, you know, for instance, this gives you haste, which you can use for both. Elemental Conduit gives you Riptides and Flame Shocks. The Seeds of Rampant Growth gives you reduced cooldown and crit chance, which is good for both. So keep that in mind, that's what we're looking out for. However, after you make your Covenant Lego and you're looking for something else to craft, I would imagine you would want to make Deep Tremor Stone. This gives you an Earthquake. It's really, really strong for damage. It's probably the highest damage option other than the Kyrian Lego. It's also great for solo content, by the way. I would recommend if you're questing as Resto often, at least make one of these at rank 1 or 2. You will thank me later. Couple tips for this Earth Ellie guy real quick. So it actually pulses threat, it doesn't taunt. So that means if you use it at the beginning of the pull, it's just going to immediately get threat because your tank doesn't have much. But if you let your tank build up threat for 10 or 15 seconds with their big cooldowns, then send out the Earth Ellie. I know it's tempting to want to use the Earth Ellie at the start and think you can keep it alive, but it's going to die if it gets threat. So let the tank build up some aggro if you want to keep it alive, then throw out the Earth Ellie, let it do a bunch of damage. You know, keeping your Earth Ellie alive for the last 30 seconds of the pull is going to be way better than trying to be greedy and then having it die in the first 5 seconds. Another thing about Earth Ellie is that trees actually kill it. You might think that trees will protect the Earth Ellie, but trees actually reset aggro. And because the Earth Ellie is constantly pulsing threat, it'll actually just it'll get itself killed. Because the trees will taunt off the tank, then the Earth Ellie will pulse threat and steal it off the trees, which is not what you want. So if you have a Boomkin in your group, you actually want to watch out and either let the trees go or try and sneak it in before the Boomkin uses trees. when you see the trees or you hear the trees or whatever, that's a good time to spam heal it as well. I use a macro. See if I have it here. It's slash target. That's not it. Okay, well, I have a macro that's just slash target greater earth elemental. I don't know where it is. It's somewhere. Take my word for it. And that's what I use to target the earth ellie. You can use like a weak aura or whatever too, but that's what I found is the easiest. Is just slash target greater earth elemental macro. Let's talk about covenants. So as I mentioned earlier, I switched to Kyrian. I think for high keys, Kyrian is going to be the best damage option. That being said, every single covenant is good. Don't feel like you have to play a specific covenant with Shaman. If you're just like, I'm only using my Shaman and keys, I don't care what's the best covenant, it's probably Kyrian. But if you are like, you know, trying to learn off spec, or you're going to play raid or whatever, just play whatever's good for the other stuff. Don't worry about your covenant for Resto Shaman. Everything's good. I would say that Kyrian is going to be your most offensive option, highest DPS. Necrolord is going to be like the safest healing option. It's going to be good for raid, and it also has a really short cooldown, so you don't have to worry about like wasting your ability. And then the other two kind of fall in between of a little bit more flexible. Let's go into Soulbinds. I'm not going to go into Soulbinds for every single covenant, but we'll at least talk about it. So there are two major potencies that are really good. One of them is going to be your covenant potency for every covenant. The other one's going to be Swirling Currents. This juices your single target healing when you use Cloudburst, and you always use Cloudburst, so it's great. Otherwise, their third potency isn't that great, so our goal, generally speaking, is to trade off a third potency for a good passive. So an example of this is the Clea tree. We can take 1-2 potencies here, and then instead of taking this third one, we can go down the middle and instead get Pointed Courage. This gives us crit. And, you know, getting 4 or 5% average crit is going to be way better than our other potencies that we would take. However, there are some situations where you can't do that. Like, for example, Mechanicos might be the tree that you run for Kyrian. Again, I haven't unlocked it yet, so I can't speak this for certain, but it reduces the cooldown in your Vesper Totem, which I think is going to be really strong. And if that's the case, we're just going to end up taking 3 potencies here down the left side. If you do that, honestly, just take whatever you feel like is good for you. I think the two options really are Embrace the Earth. This helps your single target healing, and Heavy Rainfall, which helps your AoE healing. And keep in mind with Heavy Rainfall, this is Healing Tide Totem. I've been seeing a lot of people get confused about this. This is Healing Tide, the 3-minute cooldown. This is not Healing Stream Totem or Cloudburst or whatever on a 30-second cooldown. So this is only boosting your healing rains every 3 minutes, not every, 30 seconds or whatever. For the other conduits, the two finesse I really like are Thunderous Pause and Totemic Surge. This reduces the cooldown on your utility totems, and Pause gives you just a little bit of movement speed when you switch over to Ghost Wolf form to dodge stuff. For endurance, I think the two that I like are Refreshing Waters and Vital Accretion. This gives you health when you use Earth Ellie, so you can kind of use this as a defensive cooldown. If you're using the Earth Ellie Lego, I wouldn't use this because you just want to use your Earth Ellie for damage, not as a defensive. And instead, I'd probably use this new one. This Condensed Anima Sphere is okay if you need a second endurance. So now we'll go about talents. For Shaman, I think there's like a pretty default best talent build. First row, I'm almost always taking Undulation. I think Unleashed Life is okay if you're having problems getting a lot of casts off. Let's say it's a Quaking Volcanic week or something with a ton of movement. Unleashed Life is nice because not only is it an instant, but it works on Riptide as well. Keep in mind this also works on some Covenant abilities. So for example, your Necrolord boosted Healing Wave you can juice with Unleashed Life, as well as you can also juice your Chain Heal with this. Or Chain Harvest, sorry, not Chain Heal. Obviously you can boost Chain Heal, but you can also Unleash Life Chain Harvest for more healing. Second row, I would take Echo of the Elements always. Third row is more situational. As a default, I take Spirit Wolf, but there are plenty of times when I take Earth Grab like Spiteful Week, or Static Charge if, I feel like the group needs some more stuns. The fourth row gets asked about a lot. AV is my go-to choice. Earthen Wall is great, but here's the thing, a Shaman's stacked AoE healing and is already really, really strong. You basically don't need Earthen Wall, it's sort of just extra. And I think AV adds a lot more to the Shaman kit because your go-to is going to be just use Riptide right away. It's going to give people a max health increase. It's going to increase the max health of your tank for almost the whole dungeon. It's just overall going to be a really helpful talent. Whereas Earthen Wall, yeah, it's going to do HPS, but all of your abilities do HPS anyway, right? It doesn't really add to your kit. This row right here, I just take Graceful Spirit generally. I think all these options are fine depending on situations. I would say most shamans, myself included, don't use Spirit Walkers nearly enough. So sometimes you might not get value from Graceful Spirit, but I still try and use it when I can. This row, you're always taking Cloudburst. I know you might be scared of Cloudburst for whatever reason. I think a lot of newer players get intimidated by Cloudburst. The tooltip is very long. They're trying to min-max it. Don't worry about it. We'll talk about it more in the rotation section. And in this row, always take Ascendance. Ascendance is a crazy powerful cooldown for 5-man. So this is generally my talent build. These middle three, you can kind of swap a little bit as you see fit. But for the most part, the rest are more or less set in stone. So let's talk about the rotation. Rotation for Shaman, really, really simple. You're maintaining Earth Shield all the time. Ideally on your tank, Water Shield on yourself. For mana, Earth Shield on the tank. You can move the Earth Shield if you want to like someone if they're taking a lot of damage or if they're a zoo animal or something. Other than that, you're using Riptide off CD. Riptide is nice because it's super mana efficient. It does a lot of healing for its global. It's hot. It gives you Tidal Waves charges, which increase the crit of your next healing surge, which are very, very nice. And then other than that, your main direct heal is just Healing Surge. You're just maintaining Earth Shield, maintaining Riptides, and then spamming Healing Surge when someone needs direct healing. And that's really it. Healing Surge is an insanely powerful ability. With our build we're using, we're juicing our Healing Surge by a lot. So for example, Undulation increases the healing of the next Healing Surge by 50%. Our Riptide passives increases the crit of our Healing Surge by 40%. Our Swirling Currents Conduit increases the healing of our Healing Surge by 29%. So you're going to get these crazy juicy healing surges when you're playing this build, or like, you know, the normal Shaman build that, you know, you're just going to be able to heal for like sometimes 15, 20,000 or something on a tank. And it's just like no other healer can do those sorts of huge direct heals this consistently. A lot of people ask about Healing Surge versus Healing Wave. Healing Surge is more time efficient. Healing Wave is more mana efficient. If you feel like you're running out of mana, that's when you press Healing Wave. But most of the time you should press Healing Surge unless you know that mana is going to be an issue. Also, people ask about Healing Rain and Chain Heal. These are like pretty iconic Shaman spells, and you kind of wonder why I didn't talk about them in the rotation section. In 5-mans, they just aren't that great. In this expansion, they actually moved a lot of the healing off of Rain and Chain Heal into the direct heals like Riptide and Surge. This made them a lot better for 5-mans, but also a little bit like more straightforward to play because it's really hard to get enough value off of Healing Rain and Chain Heal to make them useful in 5-mans. I would say if you know for certain that you're going to get a ton of value from either one of them, you can press them, but they shouldn't be a part of your normal rotation generally. I would say they'll make up most of the time under 10% and even sometimes under 5% of my overall dungeon healing, where almost all of it is going to come from Earth Shield, Riptide, Healing Surge, and then Cloudburst and my Covenant ability is going to be like almost all of it. So for Cloudburst usage, a lot of people really, really overthink this. I'll explain to you exactly how you should be using it. If you have 2 charges and you're in combat, always press it. Don't even worry about lining it up. Don't worry about thinking. If you have 2 charges and you're in combat, just press it. It stores healing, which you may or may not need later, and it also gives you those Swirling Current stacks. Other than that, you don't worry about it. Then once your first one runs out, if you need extra healing, you can press your second one right away. If you don't, then let it run until you got 2 stacks, then press it again. That's it. As you get more advanced and more comfortable with Shaman, you can worry about lining it up. But even if you don't line it up and you're just playing like this, I think this is going to be more value than running Healing Stream Totem. Couple things about Cloudburst is that, number 1, it doesn't store healing from other totems. So for example, if I press Cloudburst and then Healing Tide, this doesn't do anything. This will not store any healing. Another thing about Cloudburst is that it radiates from you, not the totem. So let's say you're running over here, you might think you need to pop it early, but you'll see that the animation will actually go off of you. Well, it didn't have any healing there, but the animation will go off of you. There might be a max range on it, but generally speaking in dungeons, it's really hard to get away from it within 15 seconds. Lastly, we will talk about cooldowns and utility. The one thing that's really nice about Shaman cooldowns is that they're instant. No other healer really has the ability to just like instantly do a ton of healing and save people as often as Shaman does in between SLT and Ascendance, which are both on 3-minute cooldowns. Generally speaking, I try and use the one that I think the situation will dictate. So for example, let's say someone drops very, very low and you think they're going to die this second. If you can drop SLT on them and another person, immediately you're just going to equalize their health and basically make them invulnerable. This is totally fine to use on the tank, totally fine to use on a DPS. If they're, let's say someone's stunned and they're stuck in like, you know, something that's doing a ton of damage to them, you can literally just SLT and go stand in it and then just transfer infinite health to them and they'll never die. Like, you just can't die in Spirit Link. It's not possible. No one's ever died in the Spirit Link before in the history of WoW. And likewise for Ascendance, if you know you're going to be doing a lot of sustained healing over 10 seconds, instead of pressing Spirit Link, you can press Ascendance. Remember that Ascendance does like AoE healing immediately when you press it. So if someone's in danger, don't be afraid to just press Ascendance just for the heal. Also remember, Ascendance is on a different school of magic, so if you're interrupted, mostly a PvP thing, but it's useful sometimes in PvE. If you're interrupted on your healing school, you can actually still press Ascendance. Another thing about Ascendance is the range is pretty small. It's only 20 yards. And it might seem bad, but you can actually use this to your advantage. So let's say these two guys are teammates, right? And this angel guy is in danger and needs help, right? We can step over here closest to them, pop our Ascendance. All of our healing is going to go towards our one friend right here. It's just going to be split between us two, which is very, very powerful, right? Instead of healing everybody, it's only going to heal this one person because the range is 20 yards. So keep that in mind. If it's someone in range that's in danger, try and run towards them. Or another thing I'll do is, like, let's say here's some allies and then here's one ally. I will use my Ascendance and then I'll be direct healing this one person, right? Let's say everyone's taking a ton of damage. Direct heal the person that's farthest away. And then that way your Ascendance healing splashes out to everybody. Another option is you can direct heal yourself because of the, what is this conduit? Refreshing Waters. Technically your healing surges are going to do more on yourself. Last one I'm going to talk about is Earth Ellie. First thing is that Earth Ellie sucks for tanking. The Earth Ellie is like, it can maybe take a few hits, but it's going to die in any hard content. So don't think of it as like some crazy off tank unless it's an emergency. As for use and like how the threat stuff works, I explained it a little bit later, or I explained it earlier, but you just basically want to let the tank get threat before you use it and then pop it just so that it does a lot of damage. And lastly, for utility stuff, by far the biggest utility that you have as a shaman is your interrupt, Wind Shear. You have a 12-second interrupt. No other healer even has an interrupt. And you have a 12-second cooldown one, which is insane. So two things to consider. One, your Wind Shear range is 30 yards, not 40. So it's not your normal spellcasting range. So sometimes you might get confused why you can't kick if you're very far away from a mob, even if you can use your other abilities. So make sure you're within 30 yards. The final thing is make sure you're using a focus target. So what I do is I have two buttons right next to each other. One is set focus and the other one is focus target kick. And so let's say I'm going into a pack and, you know, this one guy with the spear is the dangerous guy. I'm going to set focus to this guy as we're walking into the pack and then just do my thing, right? And now you can see where my focus frame and my cast bar would be right here. And as I'm healing, I can just see this bar right here. And even if I'm targeting allies or I'm targeting other people or whatever, I'm always watching this cast bar. And then as soon as I see the button, I can just press my focus kick and then bam, it kicks. Focus kick is absolutely mandatory for a shaman healer. If you're playing shaman healer and you're not setting up a focus kick, do that right now. Even if you're a beginner, I don't care if you're not using any of your other totems and stuff. That is the most important utility skill that you can learn. Secondarily, you have your I think the other most important one is your totems, specifically your slow and your stun totem. If your tank needs to kite, a lot of times I'll throw down Earthbind. Is it Earth Grab or Earthbind? I always confuse the two. Earthbind. You throw down your Earthbind, and this slows mobs. It's actually really, really powerful. It lasts for 20 seconds, and with the conduit, it's got like a 23-second cooldown, so it's basically up all the time that you want it to be up. Anytime your tank needs to run, you can just throw it down. Keep in mind that Earthbind puts you in combat and lasts 20 seconds, so if there's ever like a patrol or something, you have to be careful about using your Earthbind. Capacitor Totem is a nice stun. It's an AoE stun on a 1-minute cooldown, but it only activates over 2 seconds. So you can use this to sort of like try and guess and time out like when you're going to stun mobs, but you don't really use this to interrupt unless you have like a lot of dungeon knowledge to understand exactly how the mobs work. Be careful about using Cap Totem. So if you're not familiar with how stuns work in WoW, the more you stun a mob in a short period of time, the less and less the stuns do. And so I see a lot of shamans right away at the beginning of a pack just drop down a Cap Totem and stun all the mobs. But keep in mind you're reducing the duration of later stuns from, like, let's say your Rogue or your Demon Hunter or something like that. So you don't necessarily always just want to blind throw down Cap Totems in the mobs. If you do that, I'd like to do it later on in the pull. Usually when a tank goes in, you know, after a couple seconds, they're pretty strong. They have their big buttons up. Then maybe 10, 15 seconds, 20 seconds. When the tank starts to run a bit dry, maybe your team is running out of kicks, maybe they've already used their stuns, that to me is the ideal time to throw down your Cap Totem. So that covers most of the stuff I wanted to talk about with Resto Shaman. I know it kind of went on for a long time and there's lots of more utility stuff I could obviously cover, but hopefully that at least gave you the outline for what you should be doing in dungeons. If you guys have any questions or any tips or stuff that you think I missed or looked over, feel free to drop it in the comments. I hope this video was helpful. If you appreciate it, you know, give it a like, subscribe to the channel, all that stuff. And good luck out on the streets, friends, and happy keying.